My name is Melissa Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old now. The first time I realized my sister hated me, I was 7 years old, bleeding from the mouth, staring up at the sky, beneath a rusted swing set in our neighborhood park. She said it was an accident. I believed her. That was how it started, not with screaming or fists or anything obvious enough to point to later. Just a push that was a little too hard, timed perfectly, followed by a smile that stayed on her face a second longer than it should have after my face hit the ground. My sister Rebecca was 9 at the time, old enough to know exactly what she was doing, and more importantly, old enough to know no one would ever question her version of the story. Rebecca was the golden child. She always had been. The light in every room, the one my parents talked about with pride even when she wasn't there. I was just the younger sister, the clumsy one, the forgettable one, the one who must have tripped. That explanation became the family script long before I understood what it meant to be written out of your own story. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Rebecca got new clothes every season. I got hers once she grew tired of them. Rebecca got praise for B- report cards. I got silence for straight A's. If she broke curfew, she was expressive and spirited. If I forgot to say thank you once after dinner, I got a lecture and lost my phone for a week. Our dad liked metaphors. He used to say Rebecca was fire and I was fog. I didn't understand it when I was young. I only knew fire was exciting and admired, and fog was something people complained about when it ruined their view. We weren't poor, but every dollar spent on me came with a sigh like it was a reluctant investment. My shoes were always half a size too small. My haircuts were done in the garage with kitchen scissors. Rebecca had salon appointments, manicured nails, and a debit card by the time she was 15. None of that would have destroyed me on its own. What cut deeper was the performance. In public, Rebecca was the perfect older sister. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders at family gatherings, called me her baby, bragged about me to relatives. People adored her for it. They loved how protective she seemed, how generous. Behind closed doors, the smile vanished. Every conversation became a trap. "You don't really want to go, do you?" she'd say, voice light and innocent. Or, "You wouldn't understand, it's kind of a grown-up thing." Sometimes she'd add, "I'm just trying to help you not embarrass yourself." The message was always the same. Stay small, stay quiet, know your place. My parents never questioned it. They nodded along. My mother once told me, without malice or hesitation, "You should try being more like your sister." When I asked why, she sighed and said, "Because life would be easier for everyone." By the time we reached our 20s, Rebecca and I barely spoke unless we were forced to. She went off to an overpriced private college to study fashion and business paid for almost entirely by my parents. I earned a partial scholarship for engineering and worked nights to cover the rest. No help, no safety net, no congratulations when I graduated at the top of my class. Rebecca failed 2 semesters, switched majors 3 times, and still received a leased luxury car for her 23rd birthday to cheer her up. At the time, I was working overnight shifts in a warehouse. When I called to wish her happy birthday, she laughed and asked if I still smelled like cardboard boxes. That was the moment it finally clicked for me. This wasn't just favoritism, it was contempt. And worse than that, she enjoyed it. So I stopped trying to win. I kept my head down, worked harder, saved quietly, and moved out as soon as I could. I started a small tech consulting firm that for the first time in my life felt like something that was truly mine. I didn't tell my parents much about it. Rebecca never asked. Then she got engaged, and everything I thought I understood about my family and about her was about to shatter. Rebecca's engagement announcement came through the family group chat on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in champagne emojis and exclamation points. My phone buzzed while I was reviewing code for a client, and for a second I considered muting the thread like I usually did. Instead, I opened it. There she was, smiling into the camera, left hand tilted just enough to catch the light. The ring was massive, not tasteful, not subtle. It was the kind of ring designed to be noticed from across a room, maybe across a life. Beneath the photo, my mother had already replied with crying emojis and a paragraph about destiny. My father added, "So proud of you, sweetheart." Then came a flurry of congratulations from aunts, cousins, people who barely knew me existed. No one asked how I was doing. No one ever did. Her fiancé's name was Trevor Hale. Tall, clean-cut, early 30s, worked in finance. The kind of man my parents immediately approved of because he fit neatly into their idea of success. I'd met him twice before the engagement was announced. He was polite, reserved, almost overly careful with his words, like someone who had learned early that being agreeable was safer than being honest. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and asked thoughtful questions about my work. When I told him I ran a small tech consulting firm, his face actually lit up. "That's impressive," he said, and I remember being caught off guard by how sincere it sounded. Rebecca stood beside him the entire time, fingers hooked possessively through his arm, smiling like she'd won something. The engagement party came a week later, hosted at my parents' house. I almost didn't go. I told myself I was busy, that deadlines were piling up, that it didn't matter. But some old reflex kicked in, the same one that had kept me showing up my entire life, hoping maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Rebecca floated through the room like a celebrity, accepting compliments, retelling the proposal story with theatrical flair. She made sure to mention the oceanfront restaurant, the surprise violinist, the way Trevor had completely outdone himself. My parents hung on every word. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father clapped Trevor on the back like he'd personally approved the union. When Rebecca finally turned her attention to me, it was brief. She glanced at my outfit, smiled thinly, and said, "So you're still doing that little computer thing?" "It's a company," I replied calmly, "and it's going well." She hummed unimpressed. "That's nice." That was it. No follow-up questions, no curiosity, just dismissal. As the months passed, wedding planning took over everything. Every family conversation revolved around venues, dresses, guest lists, and expenses my parents were more than happy to cover. I listened quietly as they discussed deposits that cost more than my first year of rent. When my mother complained about how stressed Rebecca was, I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward in ways no one seemed to notice. My firm landed 2 new clients, then another. I hired my first intern, then a second. I started working out of a shared office space downtown instead of my apartment, and for the first time I felt something solid beneath my feet. Not pride exactly, but stability, independence, proof that I wasn't imagining my own worth. I didn't talk about it at family dinners. Experience had taught me that my successes made people uncomfortable, especially Rebecca. She preferred me small, struggling, safely inferior. And I was tired of shrinking just to keep the peace. Rebecca, on the other hand, was louder than ever. She talked about her wedding, like it was a brand launch, not a marriage. She referred to Trevor as perfect on paper more than once. She joked about how lucky she was to have found someone so financially responsible. Everyone laughed. Trevor smiled a little stiffly, but didn't seem to notice the edge beneath her words. What my parents didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rebecca's lifestyle hadn't changed much since getting engaged. She still traveled constantly, still posted photos from expensive restaurants and beach resorts, still carried designer bags that didn't match her supposed income. When I asked my mother how Rebecca was affording everything, she waved it off. "She's networking," she said, "building relationships." I knew better. I always had. But it wasn't until one quiet night during a routine dinner at my parents' house that everything shifted. Rebecca had stepped out to take a call, leaving her laptop open on the coffee table in the living room. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even curious. I was just walking past on my way to the kitchen when a notification popped up on the screen. A message preview. And my name was right there in it. I stopped without meaning to. I should have kept walking, I know that now. But some instinct told me that whatever was sitting on that screen was something I'd been circling my entire life without ever seeing clearly. So I stayed. And in doing so, I stepped into a truth I would never be able to unsee. At first, I told myself not to look, that it wasn't my business, that I was already too used to being hurt by Rebecca to go looking for more reasons. But my name was right there on the screen, glowing against the dim living room, and the message preview was impossible to ignore. Ugh, Melissa's going to be there, right? She kills the vibe every time. My stomach dropped. The message was from someone saved as Shell, and before I could stop myself, my eyes flicked to Rebecca's reply beneath it. Relax. She'll probably show up in something boring and pretend she's doing us a favor. I just need her to behave until the honeymoon's paid off. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my chest. Until the honeymoon's paid off. The phrase didn't make sense at first. It landed wrong like a sentence missing its ending. I stood there, frozen, my hand hovering uselessly near the edge of the table. I should have closed the laptop. I should have walked away and pretended I'd seen nothing. But instead, my fingers moved on their own. I scrolled. What I found underneath unraveled everything I thought I knew about my sister. Page after page of messages filled the screen. Rebecca and Shell laughing, mocking, dissecting Trevor like he was an investment portfolio instead of a person. She didn't love him. She said it outright. She talked about him like a means to an end, a temporary arrangement designed to fund a lifestyle she had no intention of giving up. The plan was simple: secure the ring, collect the gifts, enjoy the all-expenses-paid honeymoon, then slowly phase him out. That was the phrase she used. Phase him out. Like he was a subscription she planned to cancel once she got bored. I couldn't stop reading. It felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying and magnetic all at once. She mocked his laugh, complained about his taste in music, joked that he talked too much about his job. She even made crude comments about their sex life, calling him awkward, saying he looked like a confused deer, and laughing about how he always insisted on paying for dinner, so it evens out. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just cruelty. It was calculated, cold. Rebecca talked about timelines, expenses, exit strategies. She joked about how easy it was to keep Trevor compliant with affection and praise. She bragged about how blind he was, how grateful, how desperate to please her. And then there were the messages about me. I was a nuisance, a liability, a necessary prop. She complained about having to invite me to family events, worried I might ruin the aesthetic or say something that made her look bad. She assured Shell that I was harmless, that I'd never stand up for myself, that I was so starved for approval, I'd apologize if someone stepped on my throat. I felt sick. I didn't take screenshots. Not yet. I didn't forward anything or photograph the screen. I just stood there absorbing it all until the sound of the front door opening snapped me back to myself. Rebecca's voice floated in from the hallway, cheerful and light, like she hadn't just stripped the humanity from the people closest to her. I closed the laptop carefully, exactly the way I'd found it. Dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food. I nodded when spoken to, smiled when expected, excused myself early with a lie about a work call. My parents didn't question it. They barely noticed. When I got home, I went straight to the bathroom and stared at my reflection for a long time. I looked the same as I always had, but something behind my eyes felt different. Heavier, sharper. Like a fog had lifted, leaving the landscape exposed and unforgiving. That night I didn't sleep. Over the next 2 months, wedding planning ramped up, and Rebecca pulled me back into her orbit like nothing had happened. She guilt-tripped me into helping with small things, criticized me. When I hesitated, reminded me loudly and often that family shows up. My parents echoed her. When I said I didn't want to help with the venue setup, my mother accused me of being selfish. "Don't ruin this for your sister," she said. "You know how hard she's worked for this." I smiled. I nodded. I agreed. Because somewhere between that living room and that sleepless night, something in me had shifted. I knew I couldn't confront Trevor directly. He wouldn't believe me, not without proof. And even if he did, Rebecca would twist the story, paint me as jealous, bitter, unstable. No. If I was going to expose her, I needed to do it in a way she couldn't talk her way out of. I needed her own words. Clear, undeniable, timed perfectly. So I waited. I watched, I listened, I collected. And the night before the wedding, I heard something that told me I was right to do exactly that. The night before the wedding had that suffocating artificial energy that only family events seem to generate. Everyone was smiling too hard, laughing a little too loudly, drinking champagne like it might dissolve the tension if they had enough of it. I hadn't planned on going to the rehearsal dinner. I'd RSVP'd maybe to everything and hoped the hint would be taken. It wasn't. Rebecca called me that afternoon, her voice syrupy sweet, carefully controlled. She said my parents would be disappointed if I didn't show up. She said it would mean a lot to them. She said, "Please, Melissa," and that single word landed in my ear like a splinter. I should have said no. I should have blocked the number. But by then I'd already made my decision, and to pull it off, I needed her to keep believing I was exactly who she thought I was. So I showed up. I put on a blazer I didn't care about, fixed my hair, practiced a neutral smile in the mirror, and drove to the country club. The moment I walked in, Rebecca spotted me and waved me over with 2 fingers the way someone might summon a server. When I reached her, she leaned in, teeth clenched behind a smile. "You're late." I checked my watch. It's 6:58. "We said 6:30. No, the text said 7. She blinked annoyed, then rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Just sit at table 4 and don't screw anything up." I nodded and walked past her without a word. That was what she expected. Compliance. Silence. The version of me she'd been training the family to see for years. Dinner itself blurred together, dry chicken, clinking glasses, forced laughter. Rebecca's friends looked like they'd been assembled from the same mold, identical dresses, identical smiles, identical voices rising and falling in rehearsed enthusiasm. Shell sat at the head table giggling every time Rebecca made a joke at my expense. Melissa, remember when you tried to ask one of Rebecca's friends for career advice and she thought you were the assistant, Melissa? You still shop at thrift stores, right? That's kind of your brand. I laughed along. Every time I did, it felt like I was trading another piece of my dignity for temporary peace. Then Trevor stood up to give a toast. He was nervous. His hands shook slightly as he held his glass, his voice unsteady but sincere. He talked about how Rebecca changed his life, how she was the most driven, inspiring woman he'd ever met. How lucky he felt to be standing there. People wiped at their eyes. My parents beamed. Rebecca squeezed his arm, glowing. I felt my jaw tighten with every word. I'd read the messages. I knew what she called him when she thought no one could hear. A walking bank account, a temporary solution, a means to an end. Halfway through his speech, I excused myself. I told my mother I needed some air. The truth was, I was seconds away from either screaming or throwing up. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, and I paced the path behind the building, trying to steady my breathing. That was when I heard laughter, high-pitched, familiar. I turned and saw Rebecca and Shell standing on the back patio, just far enough away from the main crowd to feel private. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when I heard my name, my body locked in place. She better not flake tomorrow, Shell said. If Melissa pulls one of her emotional breakdowns, I swear. She won't, Rebecca interrupted. I already told her if she causes drama, I'll accidentally forward those photos to Trevor's office email. That shut her up. They laughed, loudly. Shell shook her head. You're evil, Rebecca smirked. I'm practical. This wedding is the biggest thing I've ever done. I'm not letting anyone ruin it, especially her. There was a pause. Then Shell asked, You think she suspects anything? Rebecca snorted. Melissa, please. She's desperate for approval. I could set her on fire and she'd thank me for the warmth. Something inside me went completely still. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and slipped into the parking lot before they noticed me. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, shaking not just from anger, but from the sheer clarity of it. Hearing it out loud, sober and proud, shattered whatever numbness I'd been clinging to. That was my breaking point. I drove home and pulled out the external drive I'd been building quietly over the past weeks. Messages, voice notes, short videos. Rebecca drunk at her bachelorette party, slurring about how Trevor was too boring to cheat on, and how she planned to make him pay off her credit cards before the year ended. I had enough to burn her world down. I just didn't know yet how much it would burn mine, too. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Rebecca's laughter on the patio over and over until it lost sound and became something hollow and sharp inside my chest. I kept asking myself if I was going too far, if I was becoming the very thing I hated, if revenge would leave me emptier than silence ever had. Each time, doubt crept in, her words followed close behind it. I could set her on fire and she'd thank me for the warmth. She hadn't just hurt me. She had counted on me, never fighting back. That was her real power, the certainty that I would always swallow the damage and stay quiet. Realizing that changed something fundamental in me. By the time morning came, I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, and that scared me far more than rage ever could. The morning of the wedding, I dressed carefully. A charcoal suit, tailored but understated. Nothing that demanded attention. I wanted to look exactly like the version of myself everyone expected, respectable, invisible, harmless. I arrived early like they'd asked. My parents barely acknowledged me beyond a distracted nod. My father made a passive-aggressive joke about not forgetting the rings this time, even though I wasn't in the wedding party. I smiled and said, wouldn't want to disappoint anyone. The hours blurred together into a haze of makeup chairs, camera flashes, and controlled chaos. Rebecca had assembled an entire army of bridesmaids around her, fussing over her dress, adjusting her curls, taking selfies like it was a red carpet event. She looked radiant. She always did when she was winning. She glanced at me once and said, At least you don't look homeless today. Then turned back to her reflection. I stayed out of the way, watched, waited. As the ceremony approached, she finally pulled me aside into the narrow hallway behind the chapel. Music drifted softly from inside. The photographer hovered nearby, snapping candids. Rebecca leaned in, fixed my tie unnecessarily, and lowered her voice. Please don't ruin this day like you ruin everything else. She waited for a reaction, a flinch, a crack, something she could feed on. I gave her nothing. Instead, I smiled, reached up, and gently straightened her veil like I actually cared. You look beautiful, I said quietly. Then I stepped back, slid my hand into my pocket, and did the one thing she never thought I'd be capable of. As Trevor laughed with his groomsmen nearby, turned away, and relaxed, I slipped a small black USB drive into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He didn't notice. Rebecca watched me closely, confused, now her eyes narrowing just slightly. I met her gaze for a second longer than usual, then turned and walked down the aisle to take my seat. She had no idea. Neither did Trevor. But by the time the ceremony ended, by the time they kissed, and the room erupted in applause, the truth was already in his pocket waiting. As I sat in the front row, hands folded, watching them exchange vows beneath white flowers and soft lighting, an unexpected doubt surfaced not about what I'd done, but about who I would be afterward. I had lived in Rebecca's shadow for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. I wasn't sure I'd recognize myself once I stepped fully into the light. The ceremony ended in a blur. The officiant announced them as husband and wife. Cameras flashed. Guests cheered. Rebecca shot me a smug look as she passed her smile full of triumph. Trevor looked happy, content, still believing he'd married the woman of his dreams. I remembered gripping the edge of my seat and wondering if I'd just set off a bomb in the middle of two families. The USB wasn't subtle. It contained everything: screenshots, audio clips, video files, organized and labeled. I'd even programmed it to auto-launch into a slideshow the moment it was plugged in. There was a note included too brief and devastating. She said you were too boring to cheat on. Still want to go to Fiji. Dramatic, maybe, but Rebecca had built her life on drama. I'd simply given her a stage she couldn't control. At the reception, the energy shifted slowly like the air before a storm. People mingled, sipped champagne, posed for photos. Then I saw Trevor's best man walk over to him and hand him something small and black. My heart slammed into my ribs. Trevor frowned, nodded, slipped the USB into his pocket, and quietly walked toward the venue office. I stood halfway out of my chair before forcing myself to sit back down. This was it. No undoing it now. Rachel, no. Rebecca raised her glass across the room and smiled at me, like she always had, patronizing and certain. I smiled back, my stomach in knots. I had no idea how this would end, only that it finally would. The next 30 minutes stretched longer than the entire ceremony had. I barely heard the music or the chatter around me. My attention was fixed on the hallway that led to the venue office, my pulse counting the seconds Trevor had been gone. Every time someone laughed too loudly or a glass clinked against another, my nerves jumped. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed the way I'd learned to do around Rebecca years ago. Across the room, she was in her element. Rebecca floated from group to group, soaking in compliments, basking in attention, holding court like a queen at her coronation. She looked at me once, raised her champagne flute, and gave me that same thin, knowing smile she'd worn since childhood. The smile that said she'd won, that I'd stayed in my lane, that nothing ever changed. Then Trevor came back. At first, nothing seemed different. His face was calm, too calm. The kind of stillness that comes after something has broken so completely that there's nothing left to splinter. He didn't look at Rebecca right away. Instead, he walked straight toward her, tapped her gently on the shoulder, and leaned in to whisper something I couldn't hear. I watched her expression flicker. Just for a second, a twitch behind the eyes, a crack in the armor. She nodded stiffly, turned to the room, and announced they'd be stepping away for a moment to freshen up before the toasts. Her voice was steady, practiced. No one questioned it as they disappeared down the same hallway. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Someone joked about wedding nerves. Someone else refilled their drink. Shell seized the microphone and launched into an impromptu speech about soulmates and loyalty, her voice too loud, her smile too desperate. I almost left. I stood, grabbed my bag, and took 2 steps toward the exit. That was when Trevor came back alone. He walked straight to the DJ and said something quietly. The music cut off mid-song. The sudden silence pulled every conversation to a halt. Glasses froze mid-air, heads turned. Trevor stepped up to the microphone. He looked pale, shaken, but composed. His voice didn't waver when he spoke. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need to say something important, and I need you all to listen." Rebecca was nowhere in sight. "The woman I married today is not who she pretended to be," he continued. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared, unblinking. "She's been lying to me, and to many of you for a long time. I have proof, and I will not be staying married to her." Someone dropped a fork. It clattered loudly against the floor. "I won't air everything publicly," Trevor said, his voice steady but strained. "But this marriage is over, effective immediately." Then he stepped down from the microphone, handed it back to the DJ, and walked out of the venue without another word. No shouting, no chaos, just silence. It felt like the collective inhale of 100 people who didn't know how to exhale. Conversations stalled. Guests stared at one another, stunned. Bridesmaids scattered in different directions. My mother clutched her purse like it was the only solid thing left in the room. My father didn't move at all. I stayed seated for the moment, letting the shock wash over everything, then quietly stood and walked out. No one stopped me. No one noticed. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, my phone exploded. I woke up to 42 missed calls. Half from my mother, half from Rebecca, a few from unknown numbers. My voicemail inbox was full, but I didn't listen to a single one. I didn't need to. The text told me everything. What did you do? Are you happy now? You ruined her life. You destroyed this family. That last one was from my father, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I believed it. I didn't leave my apartment that week. I ignored every call. I sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling again, wondering if I'd crossed a line that could never be redrawn. I kept waiting for relief to arrive, for some sense of triumph or justice. It didn't. Instead, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Rebecca was standing there in her bridal robe, no makeup, hair tangled, eyes bloodshot and burning. She pushed past me into the apartment like she owned the place, fury radiating off her in waves. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "You think this makes you better than me." I didn't answer. She paced, knocked a lamp off. My side table screamed that I'd destroyed everything, that our parents would never forgive me, that no one would ever trust me again. She called me a parasite, a snake, said I'd always been jealous, always weak, always desperate for scraps of affection. I let her. When she finally stopped, breathless and shaking, I asked the only question that mattered. "Why did you do it, Rebecca?" She froze. "What? Why, Trevor?" I said quietly. "Why me? Why all of it?" For the first time in her life, she didn't have an answer. She stormed out without another word. And that was when I realized this wasn't over. I thought the worst of it was behind me, after Rebecca left my apartment that day. I was wrong about that too. What came next wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, petty, and relentless, the kind of cruelty that seeps into your life through cracks you didn't know were there. It started with the calls. Every evening at exactly 9:01 p.m., my phone rang from a blocked number. No message, no breathing on the line, just the ring over and over until it stopped. Then came the online reviews. My company's Google listing was flooded with one-star ratings overnight, all from newly created accounts. The language was suspiciously specific warnings about bitter owners and untrustworthy people who never move past old grudges. One morning, I walked out to my car and found it splattered with egg yolk and shells dripping down the windshield. My building's security footage showed a hooded figure slipping out of frame, too short, too familiar in posture to be a random vandal. Then there was the letter, handwritten, taped neatly to my apartment door. "You might have won the first round, but the game isn't over. You forget how much I know about you." No signature, no return address. I didn't need one. The handwriting alone was unmistakable. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt something close to clarity. Rebecca had always pushed too far. Control was her oxygen, and without it, she panicked. If she couldn't steer the car, she'd rather crash it. So I did what she never expected. I stopped reacting emotionally and started paying attention. Cybersecurity had started as a practical skill for my business, but now it became something else entirely. I traced the timing of the egging incident, enhanced the footage using tools I already had access to, and compared it to public videos Rebecca had posted on social media. The same slight limp in her left knee. The same tilted head when she laughed. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a pattern. The fake reviews were easier. All the burner accounts had been created within a 15-minute window using IP addresses that traced back to a cafe in Midtown. A cafe Rebecca had tagged herself at earlier that day, smiling into her phone with a caption about working through the chaos. She was sloppy. The final confirmation came a week later in the form of an anonymous email, a fake Gmail account. No name, just a subject line that read, "Still second place attached," was a doctored yearbook photo of me scribbled over with the words, "Always the backup." I recognized it instantly. Rebecca had done the same thing when we were teenagers, taped it to my locker for laughs. She hadn't even changed the font. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me paranoid. Instead, she gave me leverage. I started digging deeper, not just into the harassment, but into her life since the wedding. Rebecca had moved back in with our parents, claiming it was temporary. According to a cousin who still followed her online, she hadn't paid rent in months. She wasn't working. She was spiraling. What surprised me most was what I found in the public court records. Rebecca had filed a civil suit against Trevor for emotional damages and breach of marital contract. It was dismissed almost immediately. The messages I'd exposed were submitted as evidence against her, but buried in the filing was something worse. She named me. She claimed the USB drive had been maliciously planted, that I had forged her private conversations. She dragged my name into a legal document without ever telling me. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was trying to destroy me. That was the moment it stopped being about survival. It became about containment. I reached out to Trevor. I didn't expect him to respond. Why would he? I detonated his wedding in front of 100 people, but to my surprise, he replied within an hour. Been meaning to talk coffee? We met at a quiet cafe downtown. He looked thinner, tired, but steadier. He thanked me. Said he was humiliated it had taken him so long to see who Rebecca really was. He told me she'd shown up at his office weeks earlier crying, claiming I'd hacked her, forged everything. It sounded rehearsed, he said, like she was auditioning for sympathy. I showed him everything, the reviews, the footage, the letter. He leaned back, exhaled slowly. She's unraveling. And she's not done, I replied. So we made a pact. Trevor had resources, legal connections, technical ones. He agreed to help trace the harassment trail properly to lock everything down. I focused on the bigger picture. Rebecca didn't just need to be stopped. She needed to be exposed in a way she couldn't spin. That's when I contacted Maya, Rebecca's old college roommate. Maya had messaged me once a year earlier after seeing one of Rebecca's posts mocking me online. "You're not crazy," she'd written. She did the same thing to me. Back then I hadn't responded. Now I did. Maya didn't hesitate. We met, shared screenshots, compared stories. Rebecca had tormented her 2 stolen clothes, maxed out, shared cards, spread rumors that cost Maya her campus job. Always the same pattern. Charm in public, destruction in private. Together we built a timeline. And once I saw it laid out in full, I knew exactly where to strike next. Once the pattern was visible, it was impossible to unsee. Rebecca didn't just manipulate people, she curated them. Selected the ones who would prop her up, discarded the ones who stopped being useful, and rewrote the narrative before anyone could compare notes. The reason she'd gotten away with it for so long was simple. No one ever talked to each other. Now they were. Maya and I spent nights piecing everything together. Screenshots, messages, old emails, dates that lined up a little too perfectly. Trevor contributed what he had, including messages Rebecca had sent him after the wedding, swinging wildly between begging, blaming, and threats. Each piece alone could be dismissed. Together they formed something undeniable. Rebecca's life, meanwhile, was shrinking. She'd landed a freelance writing gig for a mid-sized fashion blog and treated it like a comeback tour. She called herself a style journalist online, posted behind-the-scenes shots, and tagged the publication constantly. It was the last place she still felt admired, still felt important. So we didn't attack her directly. We sent the editor Kendra a package. No threats, no demands. Just a clean, factual dossier. Screenshots of Rebecca calling Trevor a bank account with a pulse. Excerpts from her dismissed lawsuit. Evidence linking her to the online harassment, complete with timestamps and IP logs. We didn't tell Kendra what to do. We just asked her to consider whether this was the kind of person she wanted representing her platform. 3 days later, Rebecca's bio vanished from the site. Her articles were quietly pulled. No announcement, no drama. Rebecca tried to spin it on Instagram, posting about choosing peace and walking away from spaces that no longer align, but her voice sounded thin. The comments slowed, the attention faded. She knew someone was behind it. She just didn't know how many of us there were. What she didn't realize was that the fashion blog was never the end game. It was leverage, because the last place Rebecca still felt untouchable wasn't her career. It was our family. Despite everything, the wedding disaster, the lawsuit, the harassment, my parents still clung to their version of her, their shining daughter who had made a mistake, the victim of bad timing and bad influences. I was still the difficult one, the bitter one, the one who took things too far. I knew arguing wouldn't change that. It never had. So I stopped arguing and started planning. My parents were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary that spring. They rented out a rustic lodge just outside the city, complete with catered dinner speeches and dozens of extended family members. Rebecca helped plan it. Of course she did. She needed to be visible, central, indispensable. When the invitation arrived, I hesitated. Then Maya said something that settled it. "Let her dig the hole," she told me. "You just bring the light." I RSVP'd yes. I bought a tailored navy suit. Simple, clean. I brought a bottle of wine and a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a single printed page, one transcript dated 2 weeks after the wedding. Rebecca's own words, pulled from a group chat we'd recovered. "They're so desperate to pretend nothing happened. It's honestly pathetic. I could burn the house down and they'd still ask me to cut the cake at Christmas. Melissa thinks she's better than me because of her little tech company. Mom still calls me her favorite. If I ever need real money, I'll just fake a breakdown. Dad will wire it before I finish the sentence." The guests began arriving just before sunset. By 6, speeches were underway. My father stood first, cracked jokes about marriage and endurance. People laughed. My mother cried softly. It was sincere, warm, real. Then Rebecca took the microphone. She talked about gratitude, loyalty, family. She thanked our parents for always supporting her, even when she didn't deserve it. Applause filled the room. My mother beamed. I stood up. "I couldn't agree more," I said calmly. Rebecca froze. The microphone was still in her hand. I walked forward slowly, the envelope light but heavy in my palm. "I have something to share," I added. "It'll only take a minute." "Melissa, not now," she hissed. It was already too late. I handed the paper to my father. "This is from a chat Rebecca was in," I said. 2 weeks after her wedding. Just read the first few lines. His eyes moved across the page. His jaw tightened. He passed it to my mother. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Rebecca stammered, tried to laugh it off, claimed it was a joke, said she'd been hacked. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because at that moment, Trevor walked into the room. He greeted my parents politely, then turned to Rebecca. "Just in case there are any doubts," he said evenly, "I have the full archive saved." My mother's voice broke. "Is this true?" Rebecca looked around desperately, searching for someone to rescue her. My father spoke slowly, carefully. "Right now," he said, "I don't know who my daughter is." Rebecca fled in tears. The party dissolved into murmurs and quiet exits. No cake, no music, just the sound of illusions collapsing. I stepped outside into the cool night air, steady and clear. It was almost over. The anniversary party ended the way most long-held lies do not, with shouting or spectacle, but with people quietly collecting their coats, avoiding eye contact, unsure of which version of the story they were allowed to believe anymore. My parents stayed seated long after most of the guests had left their hands wrapped around cooling cups of coffee they hadn't touched. No one stopped me when I stepped outside. No one tried to follow. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. The next morning, my mother called. She didn't apologize, not directly. She said she needed time, that things were complicated, that she was trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the words she'd read on that page. I told her to take all the time she needed. I meant it. Some realizations can't be rushed without breaking something else in the process. Rebecca left town a week later, West Coast. New number, new social media accounts, all set to private. The family grapevine filled in the rest part-time work at a boutique roommate's. Instead of luxury apartments, silence where there had once been constant performance. No dramatic comeback, no redemption arc, just absence. Trevor and I still talk occasionally. Not as friends exactly, but with a mutual respect that comes from surviving the same collapse. He rebuilt his life quietly. So did I. Maya launched a podcast about toxic relationships and asked me to help with the website. I did gladly. It felt good to build something rooted in truth. My business grew, steadily, without drama, without needing to prove anything to anyone who had already decided not to see me. What I learned through all of it was this: people like Rebecca don't fall because someone pushes them. They fall because the structure holding them up was never real to begin with. Once the light hits it, it collapses on its own. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand the years I spent shrinking myself to survive in that house. I don't know if Rebecca will ever change. But I do know this: I will never stay silent again to make someone else comfortable. I finally stepped out of the fog. And I didn't disappear.